everyone, Todd with CFI Pro here this week. We are now on week 2 of our 8-week course on how to be a CFI. And if you did your homework for the past week, we should be up to a point now in which you have all of your publications bound, you've done your tabbing, you've got your binder for your lesson plans, and now we can go ahead and go to the next level. So when you are getting yourself ready and you are starting to do your everyday prep like we're going to go over in this class, you always want to have 2 things out in front of you. One is going to be your lesson plan, and the other one is going to always be your PTS. Now, I have a digital PTS here. You may choose to use whatever you'd like, but I'm going to be using a digital PTS. And it just really kind of depends on what you want. I use a program here called Good Notes. And I like this program because it gives me the ability to write and highlight and then search for what I want. And then I can also use my pen to make all the notes that I want and write little stuff on there. So, are there more programs out there than that? Yes. Just throwing out there what I use and how I put my stuff together. But let's go and finish talking where we left off. We've got all of our stuff together. Maybe you have like a mountain of books now ready and they're all bound. And where do we go from here? Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is we left off in the PTS right at the area of operation 1. And I will put the PTS here up on the screen so that way you can actually see and follow along with us as we're going down through. The very first thing that we want to talk about is the area of operations. Now, in the private pilot check ride here, there are approximately 14 areas of operation. And today we're just going to be looking at area of operation 1. So, this particular area of operation is called Fundamentals of Instruction. And the Fundamentals of Instruction is the commonly known as the FOIs, or FOIs. For the rest of this course, you'll hear me say FOIs. So when you hear me say FOIs, that means Fundamental of Instructing. The Fundamentals of Instructing. Or how to be a teacher. And that's what this is. So if we're looking at our PTS and we look at the top line, Fundamentals of Instruction, what we can see is there is a note that is in italicized writing. The note says, the examiner shall select task E and one other task. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's task A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, 7 tasks. And the examiner, guaranteed on this check ride, is going to ask you task E. Guaranteed. So, what should you know more than anything else? If you said task E, you are highly correct, but we don't know the other one because it says task E and one other task. We don't know what that other task is, so we have to know all of it. And that's actually a good thing because this is actually really going to be the backbone, the basis for you becoming a powerful Jedi instructor. You're my young Padawans right now, and I'm going to help you to beat that strong Jedi instructor that you can be. Okay? And we have to take this we're going to eat this elephant just one bite at a time, and you're going to see how well this information, as we go through the course, you're going to see how well this information actually just kind of overlaps on itself. And we're going to talk about things in the future in which you're like, oh man, I remember talking about that when we talked about the FOIs back on week 2. And I'm like, yep, that's exactly when we talked about it. Because this stuff is really, honestly, like the backbone of how it really takes to be a phenomenally great instructor. So I like to put a lot of emphasis on the FOIs, simply because you can't be a teacher unless you understand the psychology of it. And that's what this is. So, we have information here that we need to present. And the information is here. We have to present human behavior and effective communication. That is our task A. But here's the question. How do we do it? So incredibly common when I'm teaching CFI students here's the overall question that takes so incredibly long to come out, and it actually should be like the very first thing on the very first day when a person starts to think about instructing. The person will eventually come to me and go, I have no idea what to say. I have no idea. Like, okay, I have a list of stuff here, Todd, but I have no clue of how to tell this to an examiner. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you how to say this to an examiner. And it's actually quite easy. And there's two specific ways you can do it. The first way you can do it is if you were actually teaching this material to another instructor. Now, according to our federal aviation regulations, we can't even do that until we've been an instructor for a minimum of 2 years. So I would not highly suggest that you try to do it like that. I would prefer you do it the second way, the way that Todd wants you to do it, which is the way that you should do it in your trade. And how is that way? Well, that way is to use this information and talk to the examiner of how you would use this as an instructor. Like, how am I going to take this information that I've learned in the fundamentals of instructing and use this information to be a better instructor? And it's really not that hard. I promise you, as we go through it step by step, you're going to see it's not that difficult. So as you can see here in Area of Operation 1, Task A, Human Behavior and Effective Communication, it gives us a reference. And the reference here is the FAA, that's who wrote it. H means Handbook, 8083-9. We don't even put the alpha, you don't have to put the alpha in there if you want to, but 9 alpha. And that's the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Now this is actually 2 chapters. It's Human Behavior, that's chapter 1, and Effective Communication, and that's chapter 3. Okay? So we're going to be bouncing from one chapter and then go to the next chapter. I say bouncing. Go from one chapter and then finish it out and then go to the next chapter. And if you remember in the very first lecture that we had last week, remember I talked about, I said, you must become or show mastery of the elements. Mastery of the elements. We know what word mastery means. You're the master of something. You know it pretty well. But what is the elements? Well, the elements are each one of these items here. As you can see here in Task A, there are 7 elements. And they are definitions of human behavior, they're human needs and motivation, defense mechanisms, student emotional reactions, the basic elements of communication, barriers to effective communication, and developing communication skills. And what's really, really cool about this is if you were to, this is really, really cool. If you were to open up, this is my Aviation Instructor's Handbook, by the way. It's I just had the spine cut off. I think I talked about that last week. But, you know, if you were to look at this book and you were to simply just look at the order in which things appear, like, for instance, definition of human behavior. There's actually a paragraph that's actually labeled definitions of human behavior. And then there's another paragraph, like number 2 says human needs and motivation. And you can actually see there's actually a paragraph called human needs and motivation. So all you got to do is just open up your book, and it's just like the FAA is like telling you, like, hey, there it is. Just read it out of there. But that's not what we want. We don't want you to just read it. That's absolutely crazy. If you get in this check ride and you've got, and I'll tell you what, let me put it to you another way. When watching people perform in this check ride, what you can't have is something that sounds like this. The purpose I am here today to tell you is that I am going to talk about definitions of human behavior. No. Absolutely not. You cannot do that. You have to stand before that examiner like there's nothing he can't ask you that you don't know. You have to have that aura about you that you just ooze professionalism. Because remember, this is not a pilot certificate. This is a separate piece of plastic. In one hand, you hold the pilot certificate, your commercial pilot certificate. In the other hand, total separate piece of plastic. It says flight instructor on it. This is not a piloting check ride. This is, can you teach? And that's exactly what we're about to go over. So, as I've told you, as I've showed you, the textbook here is laid out like exactly like the PTS. So, if you're like, oh, I don't know where to find defense mechanisms. No, you do. Because there's literally a paragraph in your book that is labeled as defense mechanisms. Right there. See? Defense mechanisms. Look at that. You got a bunch of my highlighted stuff in there. What do you think? Not that complicated. Just got to know where to find it. And it's got the references right there. Are all the references in the task throughout the PTS the same? No, it's not. But I'm going to help you because we're going to go through every single task, so it really doesn't matter. I'm going to be able to show you exactly where it's at. So. But I digress. Let's move forward. So if I'm preparing for this mastery of the elements, and it says I must look up the definition of human behavior, I'm simply going to go to my book, and I'm going to look up the definition of human behavior. There you go. Write that on my study list or on my notes or whatever you want to do. You can write it on whatever. So you got to know that. So, okay, so now you know the definition of human behavior. So there's like 5 different definitions of them, but I like one in particular. It's like, the cause of why people act in predictable ways. And then there's another one that says it's the attempt to satisfy certain needs. Now, I like that definition better. Why? Well, because when I got to talk about these 7 items on this particular section here to the examiner, I've got to cover 7 things. And I want to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And how do you do that? Well, I call these tie-ins or bridging. And I've got to be able to go from 1 to 2. So the first one is, first element, definition of human behavior. Okay, fine, got that. But the second one says human needs and motivation. So, is there a way like that this book is laid out in which it kind of transitions from one paragraph to the next? Yes, of course. You just got to know what the transition is. And that's where I come in. So, if I am going to give the definition of human behavior, it may sound something like this. Now, the first thing I want to talk to you about today is the definition of human behavior. And of course, we know that the definition of human behavior is the reason why people act in a very particular way. It's also defined as the attempt to satisfy certain needs. So that's my statement. And then I would say, well, what needs? What are these needs we're talking about? Now, if you look down at number 2, you can actually see it says human needs and motivation. And if you look over in the book, you can see that's Maslow's Hierarchy. You follow me where I'm going here? So here's where I go. So I start off by talking about the definition of human behavior. I'd say, okay, definition of human behavior is why people function the way they do, and it's based off a person trying to satisfy certain needs. And then I would look at my class or look at the examiner and go, what needs? What are these needs that we have to fulfill? Well, let's take a look at them. Back in the day, they had this dude. His name was Maslow. And he said that when he was studying people, that people are going to satisfy their needs in a very specific way. What are these needs that we're talking about? What are these needs? And so these needs are things that people need to basically learn things and to function in daily life. Now, some of you have already experienced this. Even though you may not have heard of Maslow before, you may not be familiar with his needs. The pyramid goes from the bottom up, and of course it goes from physiological needs, and then the next need is social and safety and security, love and belonging, self-esteem, and then lastly at the very top is self-actualization. So, in regards to this, how many of you have felt these needs before? Well, guess what? You all have. Let's start from the bottom one. So I have given the definition of human behavior. I've talked about fulfilling needs, and I say what needs, and then I go, oh, so this Abraham Maslow guy, he created this thing of needs, and I would talk about why that is, and then I would just go over the needs. And I'd say, you can't achieve your goal unless you satisfy the needs in the order of importance. Like, for instance, you got to have your physiological needs. Have you eaten? Are you thirsty? Have you went to the potty? Do you need to use the bathroom? Are you cold? Are you hot? Physiological needs. And like I said, some of you have had this stuff happen before, like been in a very cold or very hot training room, and all you can think about is the heat. Like, you can't think about anything else, just the heat. And how can you go to the next step in trying to satisfy these needs if you can't? You're not going to be able to concentrate on learning. You're not going to be able to do anything, because the only thing you can do is just sitting there in the room and go like this. It's so hot in here. Everything the instructor says, you're not going to be able to comprehend. Or, what if you've ever been in an airplane and had to go to the bathroom? I bet you a lot of you listening to this video have probably been in an airplane at one particular time, and you had to go to the bathroom, and the only thing you could think about was going to the bathroom. And you couldn't think about anything that instructor was saying, because the only thing you could think about was going to the bathroom. So you can't go even forward in this area, in these hierarchy of needs, unless you satisfy them from the ground up. And as an instructor, you have to do that. You have to make sure that your student is actually satisfied in these level of needs. So at this particular point, I would go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, the good thing for you is, in this week, I'm going to do a 100% dedicated lesson on human behavior and effective communication. I'm going to do a separate lesson on the learning process, a separate lesson on the teaching process, and so on and so on. Every single lesson. So you'll have 7 lessons that you can replay over and over and over again in an attempt to try to learn the fundamentals of instructions. Right now, I'm simply laying it out to you of how you're going to actually present this. So as you're listening to each one of these things that I'm going to publish pretty much each night, you have to get yourself in a way that you can actually talk about this. And I don't think there's going to be any other better way to do it than just to go right down the list, use the bridging or the tie-in stuff that I'm trying to do with how you take one point and build upon it. Let's recap what we've learned so far. I'm going to do the definition of human behavior. I'm going to talk about how they're attempting to satisfy certain needs. I'm going to go into human needs. After human needs, I have to talk about motivation. So after I discuss the person's needs, I have to then turn back around and say, now all these things are completely put into place so that I, as instructor, will be able to effectively motivate my students to be able to learn. I tell the story to a lot of people about motivation and learning, and how if a person's not motivated to learn something, they're not going to learn. You know, I asked my wife one time, I said, hey, you want to go take some Spanish lessons with me? And she was like, no. And I'm like, well, that's kind of, I really want to do this. And she's like, why? Why would I do that? What's the purpose behind doing that? I'm like, well, so we can know if they're talking junk about us at the restaurant, I want to know, and I have a lot of reasons. And she had no reasons. Do you think there's anything that I could have done to convince her to learn Spanish? And the answer is no. Why? There's no motivation behind it. She talks every day. She speaks English. She doesn't have a demand to speak Spanish. There's no reasons for her to learn it. So there's no motivation. If you're working with a brand new student and you're trying to teach a landing, well, what's the motivation behind trying to teach a landing? Yeah, living. Yeah, that's good. Living's good. Not busting up the airplane and creating a lot of money in damages. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Safety. Yeah, that's a good one. So you have to motivate that person. So my job is to motivate my students. So you see where I'm at? I'm at the end of number 2. And then here I'm going to, watch this, I'm going to transition into number 3. Here we go, watch this. But along the way, your student is going to have so many reasons as to why they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or why they haven't accomplished certain tasks. And we call these things in the industry defense mechanisms. What's number 3 in there? Oh, it just happens to be defense mechanisms. How about that? What a good tie-in. And then you would go through and you would talk about the defense mechanisms, and you maybe even have an acronym that you can go by. Dr. FCPR is the acronym on that. You'll see that when we go through the Human Behavior and Effective Communication lesson. And so after I've talked about defense mechanisms, I have to make the next jump. And that is into student emotional reactions. And so I've just got finished with defense mechanisms, and I've got to make the bridge. I've got to tie in the next one. So here we go. But you know what? Your student, when they're learning something new, especially in an environment like aviation, you can't tell me that there's going to be a certain amount of stress and maybe even a certain amount of anxiety. Well, it's true. We do have stress and we do have anxieties. And anxiety is the feeling of nervousness or worry or unease about something that is going to happen. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of things in aviation in which your student's going to have, they're going to have anxieties over. The solo, that's 1. The solo cross country, that's 2. The check ride, that's 3. They're going to have a tremendously large amount of items in which they're going to have some anxiety. How do you battle that as an instructor? No, let me rephrase that even better. I'm in the check ride. How am I going to handle that as an instructor? Well, I know that a solo, I know that a solo cross country, and I know that your check ride is going to cause certain anxieties. I know that for a fact. If I know that for a fact, I'm simply just going to tell the student that. Student, you absolutely, positively are going to have anxieties. And it's perfectly normal. Perfectly normal. Just do the very best you can, and that's all that I can ask of you. That's how you handle anxieties. Treat them as perfectly normal. Don't just be that instructor that says, hey, don't mess up my pass rate on this check ride. That's not a good way to handle anxiety. Hey, don't mess up the airplane on the solo. That's not a good way to handle anxiety. And so we talk about the anxiety, and which I like to talk about anxiety first, and then I go into stress. And then I'll say, well, what about stress? You know, if students are going to be stressed about certain things, but is stress a bad thing? Stress is not a bad thing. Stress is a good thing. As a matter of fact, stress, everyday stress, is completely healthy. Too much stress over a long period of time, unhealthy. So we need to have that certain amount of stress. And stress has good items of stress and not so good items of stress. And so I would talk about the good things with stress and the bad things with stress. And once I finish that, now I've got to go into the next one. But look at the next one. Basic elements of communication. Guess what? You're not going to find that in Chapter 1. It's in Chapter 3. So now we've got to flip to Chapter 3 and then continue our conversation. So here I go. I'm about to make that bridge. You ready? Just a couple more minutes of this lesson, then we'll be done. Stay with me. How can we do this if we're not able to effectively communicate? And communication is the key for me as an instructor. And basic psychology dictates that there's 3 basic elements of communication. See, I just read that right off the PTS. Number 5, basic elements of communication. 3 of them. The source, the symbol, the receiver. You have to be able to talk. You have to be able to do. How are you going to transmit your information? Is it going to be through verbal? Is it going to be through body language? Is it going to be through PowerPoint? Is it going to be through a text? Is it going to be, how are you transmitting your information? That's your symbols. And then receiver. That's your student. But you know what? A good instructor, all 3. You got to be the source, the symbol, and the receiver. So you got to be able to talk and you got to be able to listen. And listen is very, very, very important. Listen is defined as hearing with comprehension. So like you hear something, but you really hadn't made sense of it. But to listen and actually make sense of it, or hear it and make sense of it, that's listening, hearing with comprehension. And then after I do that, after I make that point, I've got to transition now to number 6. Well, how would I do that? And I go, but along the way, there's going to be these barriers, these things that kind of like just bounce back my attempt to communicate. You know, like a spring, like a coil. So we got to talk about these barriers to effective communication, and my acronym here is COIL. And then I would talk about confusion between the symbol and symbolized object. I would talk about overuse of abstraction. I would talk about interference, and I would talk about lack of common experience. Once I finish talking about those items, then I'm on the home stretch. I've only got one more tie-in to do, and that's to go from barriers of effective communication right into developing communication skills. It's perfectly acceptable to have fun while you're teaching this and not just make this incredibly boring and monotone. My favorite tie-in that I like to do on this is, because my next line I have to talk about is developing communication skills. The acronym for this, if you kind of arrange the letters in a specific fashion, is L-I-Q-I-R, liquor, L-I-Q-I-R. And so what I like to say is, well, what's helped me to develop great communication skills over my life? When do I actually get better communication skills? Well, when I got a little bit of liquor in me. And that helps me to memorize it. And I'm going to tell you, if you have things like that you can tell a student, that's going to be a big bonus point too, because your student's going to memorize these things easier because you've made the learning fun. You just didn't spout out a bunch of stuff. You gave them an acronym, which is the easy way to learn things, of which we will talk about in the FOIs later on this week. But it also looks as if you're having fun too, because you're smiling and you're talking about this stuff, and it makes you look like you're into it. And that's what the examiner wants to hear, because the examiner wants to see that you're having fun and that you enjoy teaching. And then I would go through my developing communication skills, which is listening, instructional enhancement, questioning, instructional communication, and whatever that R is. For some reason, role playing. Sorry, role playing being that if I wanted to train you to be in the pattern, I'm like talking to you, I'm ATC, and I'm like 439 Alpha, give me a right 360, and report when reestablished on the downwind, and then have my student go back and read that back to me as if he would in the flight portion, and then. After that, I would just do my closing of the lesson, my conclusion, and then I would just tie everything off. So, in conclusion, and then I would give them the conclusion thing, basically a recap of what we did. And then I want to look down at my lesson plan, and I want to go, let me just, give me 1 second, sir. Let me check my lesson plan here. Yep, okay. Good. And then I want to look at the examiner and go, do you have any questions? And once you say that, that means you're finished. So don't say that until you're finished. That is telling the examiner you're done and that you're ready to go to the next thing. So don't say, do you have any questions, until you're absolutely finished. Now, there are going to be some people who say, you're not supposed to say, do you have any questions? You're only not supposed to say that, in the lecture method of teaching. Because if you have a group full of people, 30 people, and you say, do you have any questions? Nobody's going to speak up. Only the really assertive people are going to speak up, because the people in the back room, they're going to see that nobody else is raising their hand. They're not going to raise their hand. Why? Well, because they don't want to hold the class up. They don't want to seem like the only one with questions. Many, multiple different reasons. But in this particular case here, in the check ride, how are you going to tell the examiner that you're done? You're going to ask them, do they have any questions? So the last thing is, I want to go back up to the objective. And I want to talk about this objective one time. I think I may have skipped over the objective, and I don't want to make sure that I do that in the future, but I want to go back up and talk about this objective. We talked about the note. We've talked about the title. We talked about the reference. The objective says, to determine that the applicant exhibits instructional knowledge of human behavior and effective communication, and how these impact effective learning by describing the 7 things that we went over. It's very important you understand that you read those objectives. Read that objective again. It says, basically, the standard blurb, to determine that the applicant exhibits instructional knowledge of, and then whatever, in this particular case, human behavior and effective communication, and how these impact effective learning. So when I'm opening up this speech to the examiner, it's going to be, all right, here today I'm here to talk to you about human behavior and effective communication. And without me understanding human behavior, I won't be able to help my student to achieve their goals and to properly motivate them. And without effective communication, I won't be able to express these goals and to challenge these goals and to assess these goals with my student to also make sure they're doing that. And these are all the things that will impact effective learning, as it just said there. And then I would describe the 7 things and then give the closure. And that's how you give a lesson. And throughout this week, I'm going to be posting dedicated lessons of basically me teaching it from as I would in a ground school setting. And you're more than welcome to post as many comments as you can or as you feel like you need below. So I feel that if you go through each one of these presentations this week and you can watch it as many times as you want to watch it up until the point of your check ride, which is going to give you a better understanding of the FOIs. You're not going to really need to put that much emphasis on like airspace and weather. These things you already know probably as an instructor. But these FOIs, brand new. Regulations, brand new. So we need to make sure we get this stuff right the first time. So now I went over with you this one task, and this one task is going to help you to understand how you present this information to the examiner. You just go through each element. You should have looked at each element in your book, and you should become the master of each element. Master. Anyway, so hopefully you've got something out of this today. I absolutely love talking about this stuff. I'm a complete dork. I love this FOI stuff, man. I can't tell you how it really does help you to become a better instructor if you understand the psychology of teaching. It can be fun. You can have fun doing it. And it's going to help you to be a better person just all the way around. No joke about that. So, tune in with me later on this week. So, tune in each day this week. We're probably going to have a new video on my Patreon account almost nightly. And because I'm trying to record one of these videos per day, it's kind of hard to talk about all this stuff together because it's about 10 hours worth of video stuff. So, hopefully we can be able to knock this out this week and be prepared for next week. We're probably going to spend... my current schedule has me, I'm looking at my schedule over here on my blackboard, basically has me talking about the fundamental of instructions and using references all up into week 3 for this. With week 4 going over regulations, week 5 endorsements, week 6 is going to be teaching in-flight maneuvers in the oral portion. Week 7 is going to be prepping for the check ride, and week 8 is going to be an addition to week 7, but it's going to be scenario-based questions and 1 or 2 live sessions during that week where you can actually chime in, a live session. You can ask me any question that you want to ask me during that session, and I will read your questions off the screen and I will answer questions in the live session. How does that sound? You can ask the examiner any question that you want to ask. There's maybe even some possibility that I have some guest speakers during this time. I've got some examiners who currently do these check rides, and they are going to give up their time to be able to spend some time with you as well. So I'm so excited about this stuff because I get to spend time with my peers and I get to work with you. Please make sure you put anything down in the comment. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate you doing that. And remember, none of this stuff is possible without you, my patrons. I really do appreciate everything that you do, and I really appreciate you being a patron on my channel. Again, with being a patron here, ask anything you want. It doesn't matter, as long as it's dealing with CFI stuff. I'm not really good at any of the other stuff outside of that. But anyway, work with that. But thank you so much for being with my patron. Like I said, YouTube channel is available to you. Also, got some other information on there. We will be going into mega detail in this Patreon account. So if you like what you're seeing, make sure you let me know. I really appreciate it. Touchdown with CFI Pro. I'll see you later this week.